আমি বাংলার গান গাই আমি আমার আমিকে চিরদিন এই বাংলায় খুঁজে পাই আমি বাংলায় দেখি স্বপ্ন আমি বাংলায় বাঁধি সুর আমি এই বাংলার মায়া ভরা পথে হেঁটেছি এতটা দূর বাংলায় আমার জীবনানন্দ বাংলা প্রাণের সুর আমি একবার দেখি বারবার দেখি দেখি বাংলার মুখ বাংলায় আমার জীবনানন্দ বাংলা প্রাণের সুর আমি একবার দেখি বারবার দেখি দেখি বাংলার মুখ
Here again with Banglar Gaan O Kotha. It means music and stories from Bengal. It is an informative and entertaining weekly radio program at CFCR 90.5 community radio of interest to the general.
আমি বাংলায় কথা কই আমি বাংলার কথা কই আমি বাংলায় ভাসি বাংলায় হাসি বাংলায় জেগে রই আমি
Banglar Gaan O Kotha is about holding a regular space every Sunday at the CFCR community radio where community members, young community leaders, children from diverse backgrounds can come to learn about justice-related issues, own language, history and heritage, develop skills as a leader, public speaker, performer, broadcaster and build relationships with others who are working to nurture artistic growth, bring social, economic and racial justice in the communities.
আমি একবার দেখি বারবার দেখি দেখি বাংলার
Dear listeners, as a new immigrant in indigenous land in Canada, how much do we know about the history of Canada? What does reconciliation mean to a newcomer, a settler, and to an indigenous person? What do we know about our own ethnic history and the history of colonization? Can we draw connections between our own country of origins indigenous people's history and Canadian indigenous history? In our view, what are the challenges of building reconciliation between newly arrived immigrants and indigenous people? Reconciliation starts with developing understanding and building relationship. It is a process of relationship building. And how can we do relationship building work? Dr. Marie Battiste, a renowned indigenous scholar, is known as a change agent, a public intellectual, and a guru of education. She will be joining the Banglar Gaan O Kotha today to share her expertise and knowledge to teach us the meaning of reconciliation. Dear listeners, today we have invited some participants here at our studio. First, I would like to introduce with our participants. I would like to start from this corner. I would like to request you to tell your name, age, and where are you studying?
My name is Phoebe. I'm 12 and I go to Brunskill School.
I'm Georgia. I'm 11 and I go to Brunskill School.
My name is Manuela and I teach Women's and Gender Studies at the university.
And this corner, please come.
I'm Oswa and I go to Aiden Bowman, grade 11.
I'm Riti and I also go to Aiden Bowman in grade 11.
Here is one more little girl. Can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Revi and I go to Greystone.
All right, and also we have a newcomer here.
Yeah, my name is Devol. I am from Bangladesh.
And when did you come here in Canada?
Like 2016, June.
All right.
Like 3 years going on.
All right, and last but not the least, here is Dr. Marie Battiste.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Marie, and thank you so much for showing up early in the morning. Actually, when I was thinking about this show, it's been a long time. And at the beginning, when I was thinking to do this show, I was not prepared to do this show. You can say that I took a long time to learn the meaning of reconciliation. Still, I'm learning, of course. I'm going through a process. But what I felt that it is hard to understand. And then I decided that I really need to share this feeling, why it is hard. And I realized that it is a lifelong process to understand this concept and the meaning of this small, short word, but it has very deep meaning. So first of all, I would like to ask you, can you please teach us today what is the meaning of reconciliation and how can we take the responsibility to learn this word?
In 5 minutes or what?
It takes 1 hour.
Well, that's the problem, and I think that what I'm in jest about is really that, you know, what was a lifetime for many indigenous peoples from the time of contact to the present has gone through many, many lifetimes of many, many people, and in the course of a process of contact and a process of diminishment of indigenous people, from the many points along the lifespans of all these many people, there has been tragedy, oppression, violence, distractions of narratives that have been laid onto our indigenous people about them. It has been the Indian residential schools. It has been the issues surrounding the denial of indigenous peoples' treaties, of First Nation treaties. And so we're trying to look at many lifetimes of work in a very short period of time. So indeed, this is not a project of, you know, of a year or a month, or even, you know, my lifetime. It's going to be several lifetimes ahead for us to make the different kinds of changes that need to come about. In the process of this thing called reconciliation, which I believe it to be not at all to be called a buzzword. I'm offended sometimes when I hear people using that because I don't believe it is. I think it is a word that captures in the moment what we're trying to achieve when we want to shift the boundaries of the colonial oppression that indigenous peoples have lived worldwide, as well as what we have lived in Canada and beyond. In my own lifetime, I think for me, the living in poverty, living under colonial rule of during the lifetime my parents were alive and well, they lived in poverty under a patriarchal government that took away their lands, moved them onto reserves, gave them very little to live on, held them in poverty, and then in other places kept them in those places, not letting them leave the reserve or leave their own lands or territories. And in all of that, it has led to a very long layers of oppression that Indigenous people are living with today. So reconciliation to me is the long-term process. It is the long-term goal of Indigenous people to acquire power, to be able to live the lives they'd like to live, that's embodied within their own languages, cultures, in their own brown and white bodies that they live in terms of living with their culture and to animate it and to pass it on as was given to them as treaties. And treaties said that they had these particular rights, which then, as a result of these treaties, they then agreed and negotiated arrangements so that British subjects could come and live here. And those British subjects immediately began to find ways to take more land, take more rights, take things away from indigenous people, my own people who live in the East Coast. And in so doing, removed us from our lands, so that when we talk about indigenous lands, it isn't the little reserve postage stamp that we live on now. Our lands are all of these lands. Now, all of these lands reside in many territories, and they aren't mine, so I'm a visitor on Treaty 6 territory. I'm Mi'kmaq from the east coast of Nova Scotia, and I'm a visitor on this territory and recognize that I'm on Treaty 6 territory in the homelands that are homes of many Indigenous people, including Métis. So, as a process, it's a long-term process. It's a lifetime process, a lifetime of you, your children, and their children. It's going to change this. But the government of Canada has a responsibility, and one that I think that as a result of the Constitution of Canada in 1982, which wasn't all that very long ago, it's in our lifetime. In 1982, Canada came home with its own constitution. But it couldn't deny any of what its relations were with the First Nations peoples before that. And the Queen of England said, you cannot do that without recognizing Aboriginal and treaty rights. And so as a result of that, in the Constitution of Canada, unlike to any other group of people, it affirms Aboriginal and treaty rights. The question is, and understanding is, what it is that Aboriginal rights are, which are probably one of the biggest questions. And it's very simply everything that our people did not give up at treaty making. So everything with regard to raising our children, about speaking our language, living freely in our community, animating our culture as we wish and want, passing that on throughout our generations, is about how we govern ourselves. It is how we govern the peoples and those who come into our particular areas, and so on. And so Aboriginal and treaty rights is a constitutional requirement, and yet within our Canada today, provinces have yet reconciled their laws to the Aboriginal and treaty rights. Court cases have come up as a result of many places, many corporations, and even governments that have not taken up these issues. And yet when they win at the Supreme Court, again, very little is done in terms of implementing the wrong that was done, or changing it, mending it. So in my mind, as reconciliation has been laid out so well through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Justice Sinclair pointed out, it's a head, heart, hand. First of all, it's our head. The first thing we need to know is, what was the history from Indigenous peoples and from their perspective? What was that history, and how did the government of Canada continue to oppress Indigenous people over that time? What has been the complicities, our own, all of us, in accepting lands that were Indigenous, are Indigenous, without any reconciliation to the fact that those lands, and these lands that we are on right now, are Treaty 6 territory lands, taken under a ruse that it was ceded, meaning that somehow, by virtue of all of this negotiation, that after 3 or 4 days of ceremony and tradition and pipe and negotiated talking and so on, the British people took all this information back to the Queen, wrote up a nice solid treaty, and came back and said, this is what you said. And we know that that wasn't what was said. So the spirit and intent of treaties is what Indigenous people hold as perspectives about how they understand their treaty in this place. And what we have is a colonial history that's been embedded in narratives that have been used to create Indigenous people as deficient, primitive, warrior, fearful, fearing, monsters of all kinds. And that has been done clearly through the curricula of the schools. In a study that I did through Mi'kmaq Humanities Studies, we took up a study of how Mi'kmaq people in my area of Nova Scotia, how the curriculum addressed Mi'kmaq people in all the curriculum materials. Well, part of that was a problem of material, because every time a curriculum was created, they dumped the previous curriculum in the dump, literally burned it, and put in a new curriculum. And they kept doing this over and over and over again, except for the fact that, you know, within our tradition of teachers, we're notorious hoarders. We are. So we hoard every book, every morsel of thing that comes, and we hold on to it, and we put it in boxes under our bed, and in the closets, and in the basements, and in the garages, and everywhere. And that's where we found a lot of the information about how Mi'kmaq people were understood in the curricula. And through the work of Nancy Peters in my book, Envisioning Mi'kmaq Humanities, Indigenizing the Academy, she writes a very long report, which I put in almost whole, but not entirely. I couldn't put the whole thing in. And what she did is she talked about the eras and the times when, throughout, from the very time of contact, how Mi'kmaq people were narrated, how they talked about Mi'kmaq people in those particular places. And each of those places at different times, for different reasons, for different purposes that the government had, they would create either fear, or they would create pity, or they would create anger in the people by virtue of the way they talked about these people. And then in so doing was able to manipulate their policies, manipulate the vote, manipulate these items in order to be able to move people into these small postage stamp reserves, send their children off to residential schools, take over all of their life from birth to death, give them their name, give them, you know, either the right to go to a hospital or withhold that. Give them health services or not, give them care for their children or not, and then decide what kind of a box, when they died, they should go in, and how much that they should be given to put them in a box to die. So their whole life has been put under a microscope of distraction and a way of saying that we were the different and we were the problem. And when we do that, then Canada and newcomers begin to pick up that narrative, pick up that from what they see as poverty around them, and they also then are unable to see what is the history, because all of it has been in the dump, or it is newly narrated around a perspective that is colonial or has Eurocentric interests in mind. So reconciliation is about our understanding, first of all, who we are, understanding where we come from, understanding how our language was taken away from us, why we don't speak that language today, and many of us don't because of the experience of not having that language in our sometimes in our homes, sometimes in the schools. I had it while I was growing up, but I had no one else around me to talk with, so I then didn't have that. So the curriculum is something that today we have a place we could do something about. We have an education system that caused part of this problem. And we also have a constitutional right to our Aboriginal rights and to the treaty rights that were negotiated in those early meetings with then were called Indians across Canada. And so part of it, I call, in the work that I do, I call it decolonization. And decolonization for me is a two-pronged process. And the two-pronged process that I talk about is that, first of all, it's called deconstruction and reconstruction. Big words, but basically the deconstruction is merely that we understand from the head what it is that happened, how we are complicit in what has happened, and to bring that information and all of it, its truth, to the forefront of our mind. And then when it's in our mind, we need to take it to our heart. We need to say, what is justice today? Some people would say, well, we can't measure today by the past, or take the past and measure it by today's justice standards. And I say, yes, we can and we should, because basically justice did not happen then. If we think that justice is happening now, we have to bring it home and we have to say, well, what does justice look like today? And in my heart, if I take all those particular elements of the oppression that we have lived, and if we bring that to home, to our heart, we then have to say, what role do we play in maintaining colonization? What role do we play in the reproduction of the narratives of deficiency of Indigenous people? What role do we play, even in our heads, when we watch somebody walk across the street or somebody sleeping on a bench that I saw this morning in Saskatoon? What do we say in our head when we do that? Because what we are saying in our head is really what we have learned. What we have learned in the system, what we have learned in the media, what we have learned from our great-great-grandparents or grandparents or even, people around us. And we continue to continue thinking and believing those kinds of narratives, all the while posing it as in this is a problem that was created by laziness, by a lack of initiative. It's about, and again, it then becomes all about them and what they lack, not the oppression that was created systemically and is also operating continually even in our personal prejudices and narratives about Indigenous peoples today. The second part, and the most important part, I think, for Indigenous people is reconstruction. Is that all of that which has happened to us in the past, all of our losses of our language, our loss of our culture, our denial of our community, the lack of connection with our elders, with the disconnect to our Indigenous knowledge system, which is uniquely a different knowledge system, different from a Eurocentric Western knowledge system. It's totally different, has its different principles, protocols, foundations. It comes from a relationship with the land and all things. It is embedded within a language system. It is embedded within communally activated learning through the kinds of ceremonies and traditions that are continuing in our communities. And so for many of us that have been colonized, our job is to understand where do we go, how do we go forward in terms of how do we effectively change the picture of the past for ourselves. How do we then recover our languages? How do we rebuild our communities? How do we formulate a strong economic plan that will enable our communities to survive in the places they are because they need to have a place to be together? How do we help then Canada and all of those in it to understand that When we are looking at issues of land, sometimes we are looking at the ways in which the Crown continually gives away our land to corporations, for their benefit, when in fact, maybe we might want to have some benefit go back to Indigenous people. Maybe Indigenous people want to have that land, to have the resources, and that they decide whether it's then used to do fracking or oil or any other kinds of things that will affect our future and our 7 generations ahead of us. So it's reconstruction of ourselves as people, our relationships with each other, our relationships with the land, our relationships with our language, our people, and so on, and to share that as we have always shared, been a very sharing culture, and as a result of that sharing culture, be able to bring in people from other places so they know and understand what it means to do that kind of work in Canada as well.
Since we all are here together to learn about reconciliation, so I would like to request our participants to engage with the discussion, and if you have any question, please feel free to ask Marie. Manuel.
What a treat to listen to Dr. Battiste on a Sunday morning. My name is Dr. Manuela Valle Castro, and I'm a racialized settler from Chile. I'm with a mestiza background. And I've been thinking ever since I came to Turtle Island 15 years ago a lot about what it means to be a racialized settler in a process of decolonization or reconciliation. People don't think many times that newcomers, quote unquote, we come with complex political histories too. Most of us come from colonial states as well. Have been facing imperialism, interventions of all kinds. And we come here with complex stories. But at the same time, there's kind of like an urge of assimilation, right? There's a big invite from this Canadian settler state for newcomers to kind of like assimilate into this idea of multiculturalism and the mosaic. And, and that's where, this complex of the model minorities happens in a lot of families, that because we have faced racism or poverty at home or whatever, many of us come here and want to assimilate into that project of whiteness and participate in the colonial settler project, right? We're invited to, and our success here is offered as proof, right? That the system works. But that's flawed as well, because we know that to immigrate here, it's a complex process. Not everybody makes it here. And the meaning of reconciliation for me is very special, because I grew up in a military dictatorship. And then when I was a teenager, we had our own TRC in Chile, which was based in the South African model from post-apartheid. And I studied this model later in my grad school. And I argued that it's a very flawed model, because exactly it's a state-imposed reconciliation that really, in our case in Chile, emphasized truth, which was the truth of the victims, right? So victims were extracted of their testimonies, but there was no justice. Right? So I think that the big word that I was really happy that you brought it up is that we're missing when we talk about truth and reconciliation. We have to talk about truth, justice, and reconciliation. Because just laying out the truth, apologizing, and then saying, okay, now we're going to continue with the violence, but we already apologized, so I guess that makes it right. So we haven't undone the injustices, right? If anybody here has been to Tasha Hubbard's film, okay, I'm gonna try to say the Cree title is Nipa Wis Tamasowin. We will stand up about the recent case of the murder of Colton Bushey, the execution of Colton Bushey by Gerald Stanley here, close in Treaty 6. And the family is now calling for an inquiry and an overhaul, like a revision of the whole justice system and its racism. So I think that we need to get behind initiatives like that really focus on justice. And every time people are calling us to talk about issues of climate change or reconciliation or decolonization, we have to recenter these issues around what you were saying, land, governance, sovereignty. It's not reconciliation for me, it's not about just learning the history. That's the first part, but also about correcting these injustices. And I think that newcomers were in a very privileged position to do that, because we also understand the global interconnections of this, right? We understand how things, how colonialism is happening here, and it's also happening in Palestine, and how the interventionism that it's being, you know, the Canadian imperialist initiative of supporting the coup in Venezuela after their oil. It's not really about democracy or humanitarian crisis. If they were worried about a humanitarian crisis, we wouldn't have 162 indigenous reserves that don't have running water, right? Or children that die in the foster care or child apprehension. If the United States was worried about a humanitarian crisis, they wouldn't have migrant children dying in their prisons, right? So I think that newcomers bring this global perspective. We're in a privileged position to speak up and to really talk about truth, justice, and reconciliation, and to connect the colonialism and the imperialism that happens here and at quote-unquote home. So that would be what I would like to add to Dr. Battiste's brilliant comment.
It's been great to listen to both of you. I have learned so much in just the past half an hour, so thank you for that. I immigrated to Canada 5 years ago. I am a settler on Treaty 6 territory. I'm a very honored guest on this land. I'm very grateful for the opportunity it has presented me with. And so my journey of learning about reconciliation and the history of Indigenous people on this land has been a long one, and I know there's so much for me to learn, you know, and it's been a quite graceful journey for me to learn about what it means to be an ally. And so I have learned throughout this process that most newcomers here don't get a chance to learn about the history of Indigenous people. It is not something that, you know, is presented to us throughout the immigration process. The only way me and my siblings have been able to learn about it is somewhat through school, and obviously that's still very flawed, and there's a long way to go within the curriculum, as you said. And yeah, there's been so much that I've had to unlearn and learn within just 5 years, you know. And the concept of reconciliation and sovereignty of Indigenous people are something that I think are a very key part of giving justice and rights to Indigenous people. So the one question I would have for you is, what would it mean for a youth, an immigrant, a settler on Treaty 6 territory to be an ally? How do you think we can best project our allyship to support our Indigenous counterparts?
Thank you. Could we get all the questions sort of and then answer?
Georgia, are you ready? No. Okay, Azwa? No, okay. Maybe we can go with this. Yes.
Okay. Well, I was talking earlier to
Phoebe.
Okay.
Please, go ahead.
So is there anything that us as kids can help to learn about that justice, or to help make that justice happen?
Mm-hmm.
How is it like growing up, knowing that your heritage was more, like, not as strong as it used to?
Well, thank you for those questions. I guess I start with the ally. I think it's that's one of the things. One of the things I do is teach also at the University of Saskatchewan, and I teach teachers in 2 required courses that every teacher has to have. And the first one is a course in anti-racism. It's a way to situate your identity, situate yourself. In fact, it's called situated identity in an anti-oppressive education. I can't remember context, anti-oppressive context. And the other one is First Nation Métis Inuit Education Foundations. And the anti-racist education course that we teach really asks each one of our students to examine themselves, their own situated identities. And that what that means is, well, first of all, is understanding where you have privileges. Not everyone carries the same privileges throughout their lifetime. And because some of those privileges are so invisible, it's hard to see how they are. When you're a youth, you say, I'm so oppressed by my parents, they won't let me stay out till 11 o'clock, you know. And I'm so oppressed because the father won't let me put, you know, earrings in my belly button and things like that, you know. I'm so oppressed. I can't get a tattoo put on my arm. And so there's multiple layers of feelings of oppression that we feel. Some come individually, and over a lifetime, you know, your age will change and you'll be able to put, you know, tattoos anywhere you want, and you can put as many earrings on in any part of your body as you want. But some people can't change the color of their skin. And you can go through a lifetime recognizing that some kinds of skin coloring gets a pass no matter where you are. And other people are stopped at the border. Other people are stopped at a conference just this past weekend, racialized and noted because they were black, that they were, you know, somehow not belonging to this prestigious educational intellectual conference in Vancouver. So you can go through your lifetime and recognize that some things I'll grow out of. I'll get big and, you know, I won't have this as a problem. But some people's oppression will be lifelong. And skin, poverty. How do you work your way out of poverty? You know, one of the things that often, you know, when we are young people, we say, I don't have any money, but your parents have money. And, or, you know, they make sure that you have a good education so that you will always have an opportunity to get a job and other things. Whereas in our communities, if you're impoverished, there is very little ways to get money to be able to get to the place where you would like to be. That takes me to a question that you asked, Georgia, and that was about my own life. How did I get here? I have to say I'm a very privileged Mi'kmaq person today. I have my doctorate degree, I have a master's degree, and they are from the top universities in the world. I went to Harvard for a master's degree. I went to Stanford University in California for a doctorate degree. I have 4 honorary doctorate degrees. I am a member of the Royal Society of Canada. I am a Pierre Elliott Trudeau Fellow currently. So all of this has come about by how? Congratulations. How does that come about? You know, because my parents lived, when they left the reserve in 1947, before I was born, they left the reserve and went to pick potatoes in a and my father worked as a hard laborer in picking potatoes, and we lived in a tar paper shack behind the potato house. So from that, we had nothing, nowhere, no how. How did I get forward? Well, first of all, my father had a keen interest in reading. He didn't get beyond grade 4 or 5 in his education, but he learned reading, how to read, and from his own reading, he was reading all the time, this and that, you know, mostly magazines and Time magazine, whatever kind of thing. We had a lot of magazines seemingly in the house, and But he also had a keen interest in education, and he always said, do the best you can, and just keep on going, and keep on going till you're done. And they were very happy when I came home with B's and A's, and and even rewarded me with a $1 for A's, and or a monetary amount for A's and some monetary amount for B's. And so it was kind of like a small little effort, but it was my pride in giving to them that joy, because they had so little, because they had nothing but the joy of watching kids get on through school. That was what gave me joy in giving it back to them. And they then gave it back to the others. And so as I went up in school and was among those who were the only ones who got, through high school and then on to university, I got it through scholarships. I worked in the university. I took loans. I did everything that everyone does to get through school. But in all of those things, each time I graduated or I was rewarded with something, it gave them such joy and pride in me that I just kept going on. There's something in me, I don't know. It's sort of like the, make the parent happy kind of syndrome. But in so doing, the pride they had was then my dad would always then go back home and talk to his family about his children and how well they were doing, and they too took on the pride. So I do all of this for them, for my family, for my communities, for Mi'kmaq people as a whole. And so when I see other Mi'kmaq people going forward and achieving these great level and heights of greatness, I'm so proud, because I know I'm sharing their pride in what they're doing. And I don't know that, when those who, we often in our communities, we're so communally connected that anything one does, it relates to everyone. And unfortunately, there's a lot of cases where, non-Indigenous people have a small nuclear family, and their pride is their father and their mother and their grandmother and their grandfather, and maybe their aunt and uncle. And that's about as far as it goes, right? Everyone's very happy that you got educated. But it is not like a huge community of thousands of people who then cheer you on and help you on. So those are the kinds of things that I think are important, is that we continue to see the value in the way in which education can be made for us. And that when you get to a level of a master's and doctorate degree, as some of us get to, we find that that's where education changes. What you get up until then, I think, is oppressive. Excuse me, because that's what the state gives you. They give you the narrative. They give you the topics. They give you as much or as little as they want to give you. And when you get to this, what is called higher education, you get to then study what is important to you. And you get to draw upon all the things that you think are important, and you push it forward, and that's how then upper education moves. So the kind of thing, Aswa was talking to me earlier, her project and looking at diversity and inclusion and the histories that we aren't taught in high school, I'm quite impressed with that work. Aswa, you want to tell us about that?
So we are a national working group of youth of 15 people, and we are working on looking at the history curriculum of Canada and eventually taking surveys from people such as you, adults, and Indigenous adults as well, and looking at the history, and eventually, hopefully, writing a report and changing the history curriculum the way it affects it.
Dear listeners, actually we don't have much time in our hand. I wish I could continue more and more. We have last question from Ranjan, and then we have a song. Before we go home, we would like to enjoy it's Emma Stevens is Mi'kmaq
daughter of my cousin.
Okay.
And Emma, beautiful singer. Her aunt helped her put together the song Blackbird, which was a Paul McCartney song, Beatles. And they translated it into Mi'kmaq. So it is the song Blackbird, and it is one of hope. It is one of coming up from the bottom and taking the broken wings and flying. And it symbolizes youth. It symbolizes their capturing and developing their own strength as they begin to fly, and they're flying with their indigenous language.
Wonderful, wonderful explanation about the song. I can't wait to hear that. But before we enjoy the song, I would like to take the last question from Ranjan here.
Thank you, Marie. I learned a lot from today, and I have also learned this reconciliation is also part of everyone that include, and it's a many generation unlearning and relearning process. As you have explained, reconciliation mean a lot of things. I just would like to know what we can take one thing that we can practice in our everyday life. Just one thing from this show that we can do in our home to understand ourselves, and also take part of the responsibility that we also need to be part of it.
Well, I would say the one thing I would say is honor all our relations. A very easy thing that when Indigenous people go into ceremony, when we pray for all of our relations. And all our relations is not just Indigenous people, and it is all people that we know, all around the world, all our relations, because everyone is in relation to the land, everyone's in relation to the water, everyone is in relation to the universe around us. And it's the easiest thing to do. The easiest, most wonderful thing to do is to say all our relations in a prayer before or after a meal. When we see people on the street, all our relations. When we see the water and we walk on the water, all our relations. To be reminded that that water feeds all of us everywhere, as does the air, and as does the nourishing food that we eat, all of our relations. And to me, that helps us ground what Indigenous peoples really stand for. And if we think about all our relations, then we must think of all our relations justly, fairly, equitably. And I would add that to be the kind of the addition to all your relations.
Thank you so much, Marie. Dear listeners, our today's event has been supported by the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan and Nest Creek Cultural and Recreational Society, and also Office of Sustainability, UFS. And as I told you before, that we would like to enjoy a song before we go home. It's a Mi'kmaq song, Blackbird. And before that, Manola has an announcement to share with our community members, right?
I just want to invite all the listeners who are interested in thinking more about this work. We have a community anti-racism network that meets monthly. So if you're interested in joining, please email me at manola.valle@gmail.com. That's manola.valle@gmail.com. And also, if you are interested in joining the Hands Off Latin America Coalition, we meet every week, every Sunday at 4 at the CNYC on 905 20th Street West. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all the participants, and thank you so much, Marie, once again. And our today's technical support assistance has been provided by Ranjan Dato, and I'm Jabunisa Chapula signing off. And we will look forward to do more this kind of show in future. So please stay tuned, CFCR 90.5, and stay with us, Banglar Gaan O Kotha. Let's enjoy Blackbird.
Puliskin schwabeninto Gnama sit lai jadim Del bedausen Eskamadumus and Negnigem in Jasin Puliskin schwabeninto Ola bin again midage Del bedausen Eskamadumus and Negnige seyasin Budaliskiet Lajasi Don was the deck bonik by tu the deck bonik by tu Police get schwabeninto Gnama sit lai jadim Del bedausen Eskamadumus and Negnigem in Jasin Puliskin schwabeninto Ola bin again midage Del bedausen Eskamadumus and Negnige seyasin Budaliskiet Lajasi Don was the deck bonik by tu Don was the deck bonik by tu Budaliskiet schwabeninto Gnama sit lai jadim Del bedausen Eskamadumus and Negnigem in Jasin Eskamadumus and Negnigem in Jasin Eskamadumus and Negnigem in Jasin
CFCR Community Events Magazine is proudly brought to you by Affinity Credit Union. At Affinity, our delegates allocate funds to support initiatives and organizations in our communities. Their deep roots and local perspective allow us to provide support that will have the biggest impact on our members and communities. For more information, visit us online at affinitycu.ca. CFCR Community Events Magazine is proudly brought to you by Affinity Credit Union. At Affinity, our delegates allocate funds to support initiatives and organizations in our communities. Their deep roots and local perspective allow us to provide support that will have the biggest impact on our members and communities. For more information, visit us online at affinitycu.ca.
Hello everyone and welcome to Community Events Magazine on CFCR 90.5 FM. On Friday, June the 14th, come to John Lake Park and School Grounds at 2606 Broadway Avenue for Fun-Filled Festival Avalon Affair. It is on from 5 to 8 p.m. More information can be found on avalon.ca website. Saskatoon Cycles Bike Sale is planned for Saturday, June the 15th at Western Development Museum. Starting with intake at 8 a.m., it will run until 3 p.m. For details or to donate bicycles or bicycle parts, please contact Kathy at cwatts@sasktel.net. The 22nd Zoo Gala is on Friday, June the 14th at the Saskatoon Zoo. Funds raised will go towards building a new home for the bears. Tickets can be purchased at saskatoonzoofoundation.ca. June the 20th is World Refugee Day. Walk with refugees between 12 noon and 1 p.m. at Civic Square, right by City Hall. And June the 15th is the deadline to submit talk proposals for TEDx University of Saskatchewan event coming up on August the 31st. This year's theme is Building Bridges. Visit tedx2019.usask.ca to learn more. CFCR 90.5 FM.
CFCR Community Events Magazine is proudly brought to you by Affinity Credit Union. At Affinity, we won't buy your trust, we'll earn it. Being a member of Affinity means having a partner that with you through all your financial stages and decisions. Being a member means more than having a great choice of products and services. It means having advisors who care about your best interests and support your community. Become a member today and unbank yourself. CFCR Community Events Magazine is proudly brought to you by Affinity Credit Union. At Affinity, we won't buy your trust, we'll earn it. Being a member of Affinity means having a partner that'll give you advice and stick with you through all your financial stages and decisions. Being a member means more than having a great choice of products and services. It means having advisors who care about your best interests and support your community. Become a member today and unbank yourself. CFCR Community Events Magazine.
Hi, this is Neil Bergen, Station Manager of CFCR Community Radio. Our sponsors are our lifeblood. Without them, we wouldn't be able to stay on Saskatoon's airwaves. Supporting CFCR sponsors is a way to support the station. And remember, when you visit a sponsor, let them know why you selected them. If you'd like to become a CFCR sponsor, give us a call, 664-6678.